Okay, ladies and gentlemen, Studio 88 took a hiatus for the weekend. We had a little COVID scare with a close friend of mine, so we decided to play it safe. So we took the weekend off, which led my producer Dara to dig into the archives, and he pulled up an interview that he did with Jacob Stitch Duran, which was was a cool interview, and he never really got the chance to fully put it out there. So digging into the archives today, we're going to release Jacob Stitch Duran. I hope you enjoyed as much as we did. That's about it.
Good guy, good. The whole group, young brothers, like Michael B. Jordan says, Stitch, we went from being actors, now we're writers, producers, and directors, and so they achieved all that.
That's awesome.
I'm glad to be part of it, just for the hell of it.
How did you get involved?
They called me, so yeah, they've always called me, man. I've been like in 6 movies, maybe 7,
Yeah.
and they called me to play myself. Yeah,
That's awesome.
so it's just kind of nice. Yeah.
What was the first movie you've been in?
One with Woody Harrelson and Antonio Banderas, called Play It to the Bone.
Okay.
And then the second one I did was Ocean's 11.
Oh yeah.
When Klitschko fought Lennox Lewis, when the lights went out, they robbed the bank. I ended up with Vladimir that time anyway. And then I did Balboa, when Rocky fought his last fight. And then I did one with Kevin James and Salma Hayek, Here Comes the Boom, MMA movie, comedy. But it was great, man. And then Creed 1, Creed 2. So, yeah. So it's pretty crazy.
Do you like being in front of the camera?
I'm used to it. It comes with the territory, man.
Yeah.
So I've always been the same kid I was growing up, man. That's why I go back home and think, man, you never changed. I said, well, what am I going to change for? I like me when I was young. What the fuck am I going to change for? Right? Yeah. So that's how I'm crying, man. He's like this, look. So. Yeah, it's the dust, right?
You can talk about what you have been doing.
All right. Yeah, so the question always asked, what do you do as a cutman, right? Well, my name is Jacob Stitch Duran. I'm a cutman. I work with boxers, MMA fighters, and now I'm doing the new bare knuckle fights. My only job is to keep them in the game and give them that opportunity to win the fight.
How did you get involved in I guess, being cutman? That's the correct term then, right?
Yeah, being a cutman, that's the question that's been asked. How'd you end up becoming a cutman? And, I have doctors and paramedics and nurses. Everybody wants to be a cutman because they see what I do. But I've been doing this for like 30-something years. I grew up as a farm worker in the San Joaquin Valley, picking tomatoes, peaches, cotton. I was born and raised in a migrant camp. And I was real good in baseball, so I wanted to play baseball. But I walked into a college, which was 9 miles away, and I didn't have a car, so I would ride with friends, and they would leave after school, and I'd stay in practice, and I'd have to hitchhike back. So I joined the Air Force in 1974. They stationed me in Thailand, and I didn't even know what Thailand was. I was a young kid. Saw my first Muay Thai fight. The guy kicked the guy in the head, and I said, I'm in. So that whole year, I trained in the martial arts, and I got back to the States in Oakland, and I got into boxing to improve my hands. And from there, I opened up my own school of kickboxing with just a credit card, to show you how crazy I was. But I was already recognized as a good trainer, right? And so opening my school, I trained fighters, I managed them, I promoted fights, but I also had to learn how to be a cutman. So wrapping hands was one of the functions, and working the cuts and the swelling came with the territory. So for economical reasons, plus I wanted to learn the whole game, that's what got me going.
So I know you live in Vegas now. What specifically brought you here?
The reason I came to Vegas is to follow my dreams. As crazy as it seems, right? I've always been kind of ballsy anyway. But like I said, I had a very successful school of kickboxing in Fairfield, California, ASK, the American School of Kickboxing. I was working with a lot of fighters in boxing and kickboxing, and my original goal was as a trainer, but then I just really started coming to the top as a cutman in kickboxing and boxing. So 23 years ago, I had a dream to come to Vegas and come with the big boys. If you're an actor, you go to Hollywood, and if you're in theater, you go to New York. If you're a boxer, you come to Las Vegas, the boxing capital of the world. So I put in for a job transfer. I had a corporate America job, been with them for 23 years, and I asked for a job transfer, and I waited, and finally I got a call, and they said, hey, there's an opening in Las Vegas, but you got to be there in a week. And I said, a week? I can't do it in a week. I have all these obligations. In 2 weeks, man, I'm telling you, I sold my house. I transferred my school to a student. I took a $25,000 a year cut and pay. I put my family in a U-Haul and drove 8 hours to Las Vegas to do what I'm doing. And at that time, it was only boxing. And then I was already working with a lot of top fighters in boxing. And then the UFC came around, and that changed my life.
So you mentioned that the UFC came around and changed your life. How did you get involved in the UFC?
Well, how I got involved with the UFC is I knew Dana White from way before the days of the UFC. We were training fighters. I was training fighters and working with A-level fighters. Dana was in the gym doing pads for housewives and executives and all that, but he was still in the mix. So I knew Dana then. And I was doing a K1 at the Bellagio, and he asked me for my card. The next day he called me and said, look, we bought the UFC, Frank Fertitta, Lorenzo Fertitta. Will you be interested in being a cutman? And at that time, it was only the legendary cutman, Leon Tabbs, that was there from UFC #1. So they brought him on board. So it turned out to be Leon and myself, and Burt Watson was a coordinator. So we got the program you see with the UFC now, and all the other MMA organizations are programs that we established with the UFC that worked at the high level, so everybody uses it. But that's how I got involved with the UFC. And like I say, with that, it changed my whole career, my whole life.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the history that you have with your family and with protections for workers.
Yeah, the questions I always ask, how did you get involved with supporting fighters and helping fighters out? Well, that's always been my nature, but I grew up with that type of mentality because I grew up as a farm worker in the San Joaquin Valley of California. It's known as the agricultural capital of the world, the San Joaquin Valley. If you ate it, I picked it for you, bro. But we lived in a migrant camp, and the migrant camps were designed, if you live in the migrant camps, you go work for this owner in his crops, his fields, whatever. So we did that. And then finally, like in the second grade, we moved out of there to a small town called Planada, California. But we were still farm workers. And during that era, the elders, Cesar Chavez, which was our guy that really led the boycotts to the farmers of treating the fighters right, my parents always supported that. And there was a big historical move when Cesar Chavez and a bunch of United Farm Workers walked from Delano, California to Sacramento, which is the state capital, to protest about unfair practices for farm workers. I mean, literally, we're working the fields, and my mother or my sister or whoever, the ladies, would have to walk 30, 40 rows down the field, squat, and go to the restroom. We had no restroom facilities, right? Well, now they have, those portables. When we used to drink water, we all drank out of the same tin bucket, out of the same tin cup that we would drink and drop it, and it'd be muddy, you'd got to rinse it off. So those were the practices that we lived, We'd be working in one field, and they would be spraying the field next to us, crop dusters, and on a windy day, the pesticides would come, and I have to clean my glasses, and bitch at these guys, these pilots, keep it over there. But those were some of the things that we went through. And Cesar Chavez, like say, doing, when he boycotted the grapes and the lettuce, they made that famous walk from Delano, California to Sacramento, supporting the United Farm Workers. And with that, my parents got involved. They walked through our little town, and we hosted them. We put them up for the night. This is like 100 people, and washed their clothes, fed them, and all that. And at that point, I saw what my parents and the community were doing in support of each other. And with that being done, things got better for the farm workers. The grade of pay got better. So that's where I got my drive to do the right thing for the right people.
So how does that then translate to your experiences in UFC or in boxing and stuff? Like, have you noticed, any kind of similar struggles? Like, is there any parallels? What do you think?
Well, that's a very good question that you're asking on what kind of parallels are in boxing and MMA opposed to what I grew up with. Like I say, when I first moved to Las Vegas, it was boxing only. And boxing has always had its reputation of not treating the fighters properly. A good example is managers will manage a fighter and automatically sign them up for 33 1/3%. But when you understand the game, and fighters don't, is that a manager can negotiate, or a fighter can negotiate anywhere from 1% to 33 1/3%. 33 1/3% is the maximum. And these managers right off the bat will present them that program. And I've been educating fighters. I said, look, let me tell you to you this way. If the only thing that the manager is doing is making a phone call to get you a fight, he's basically your agent. You give him 10 to 15%. But in the case if the manager is paying for your apartment, paying for your car, paying for your food, investing in you so that he could recoup that as you win more fights, then that's a fair amount. But it doesn't happen that way. And I still talk to a lot of the fighters, and they're going through the same headaches. So, excuse me. So, there we go.
So did you, I guess, is that the same with UFC, or is that different? Because I know you mentioned that with boxing, that's how that works.
Yeah, well, that's it. And I was going to get back into that part two to that first question that you asked is, I saw all these transitions going on in boxing, and when the UFC first started, everything was done, from what I look at, was done properly. During the Reebok deal, when it first came out, the fighters and the trainers and the media and the fans just hated the whole project, right? Because you were taking money away from fighters that were making a lot of money on sponsorships. Well, they took the sponsors away from the cutmen, and I was making a lot of money on that. So John Nash from Bloody Elbow called me and wanted to know if I'd be interested in doing an interview on how the Reebok deal affected the cutmen. And I kind of went back to when I was a young kid, what would my parents do? Well, I know what they did. They joined the march with Cesar Chavez. So I figured, what, if any time I'm going to have to man up, it's going to have to be right now. So I was very politically correct with the interview. You could go to bloodyelbow.com and read it. John Nash is the writer, and it's just that maybe it was the wrong time at the wrong place. It's like putting gas into a fire that was just turning off. It just exploded, right? So the interview went viral, and I guess which was a good thing, right? But I get a call a couple of days later from the UFC, and everybody's texting fighters, trainers, staff from the UFC, promoters, F Dana, F UFC, F Reebok. They hated the program, right? And so they called me and simply said, and there was a friend of mine that called me, and his voice is cracking, because we're all friends, right? And we worked together. I was with him like 15 years. Simply, he said, because of the interview you did about Reebok, the UFC is not going to use you no more. All right, kind of slapped me and hit me here, right? So I kind of kept my composure. I said, all right, I appreciate it. But do me a favor. You tell Dana I said that he ain't got no balls, that he should have called me personally because he's the one that brought me on board. So we left it at that. So I'm getting a bunch of messages. And the next text that I get was this young guy that's supporting me. And I said, I want you to be the first one to know that the UFC just let me go for speaking out about the Reebok deal. Maybe I got to find another job now. And that went viral. I did like 57 interviews the first week. Had camera crews come to my house. You would have thought I was OJ and I'd kill somebody, right? And but I did what I had to do. And unfortunately, they let me go. But in doing the right things, I got calls from all over, promoters from all over the world. Like I said, everybody's supporting me. I'm at the Creed premiere in Los Angeles for the first Creed, and Wesley Snipes comes up to me, Mr. Hollywood. And the only thing he says, he says, Stitch, the UFC did you wrong. So at that point, I knew that what I had done was the right thing. Yeah.
And that's very similar to, I guess, what you were talking about when you were younger. Yeah. And the protests and the march.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I grew up with that mentality, through my parents and the elders that we lived with. Everybody, you had to. If we didn't back each other up, then that was a little bit of a concern. And there were other fighters, A-list fighters, that were trying to unionize guys and all that, and nothing ever happened. Vanderlei Silva, Nate Quarry, just John Fitch, a lot of the guys, Randy Couture, all these guys, the system is there to be developed. It's just that fighters have to say, you know what, I'm going to take a bullet, not only for myself, but for the project of MMA just to go forward, and combat sports, but education is the whole key to everything. And, it's time for guys to man up. You're part of history already fighting in these big organizations, but be part of history and making a change for the right. And I remember when I first started with the UFC, Dana says, oh man, as we make money, you all make money. They made a lot of money. I didn't make no money. So.
And I guess that's reflected on the fighters too, right? Like there's a lot that they're being cut out on, right?
Yeah, of course, fighters definitely, they're just not being treated fairly. There's a lot of money in the kitty. There's a big pie that should be split up evenly. And these fighters are eating the crumbs, but they're not eating none of the fruit or, the strawberries that are in the pie. So give them a taste of that, man. There's a lot of money to go around.
It's interesting too, because like they're fighters. Like it's what they do is they fight. So
Yeah.
you think that they would want to take that fight outside and fight for their rights.
Well, yeah, that's a great point. They are fighters and they should be fighting for their rights. But keep in mind they are fighters. Their whole main course is to win a world title, right? So if anything is going to disrupt that through the training, through the growth pattern of getting the support of a major promoter, that falls within their mentality of, do I want to do that or do I want to go after a world title? Not everybody's going to be a world champion. Not everybody's going to make the money that these A-list fighters make. But, if you got a union together, you might get more money then than you are getting right now. And I think that's the whole principle of getting people together as one unit.